Hello everyone and welcome back to Prog Reviews number 4 weeks running. This is going well so far. Today's review is an album that is very much a personal favourite of mine. One of my favourite albums of all time. Probably one of the first progressive rock albums I really fell in love with, and that is Red by King Crimson. I think I've mentioned before on the channel how much I absolutely love this record, and I'm probably going to be talking a lot about this album today because not only do I have my own opinions, but there's just so much to talk about and digest in this particular album. It's very much a bit of a step away from King Crimson's sound previously, but it still keeps that kind of same essence of the group. A lot more experimental stuff going on here, definitely some inspiration taken from previous albums like Lark's Tongues, even the jazzier influences of Islands as well, but I will mention all of that when it comes to the actual review. But beforehand, if you guys have not entered my contest yet, it's still up and running up until the 1st of March. All of the information is on my Instagram and my Twitter. There's even a community post that explains the general gist of the contest, so if you are interested in winning an album, then go take a look at those. The one on Instagram is probably the clearest out of all of them, and preferably would be nice if you could all do it on Instagram because I can sort out hashtags and stuff on there. But anyway, enough of that. Another announcement that I have is that recently an author of a progressive rock book sent me their book. This is the book right here. I've actually started reading it. It is The Strawberry Bricks Guide to Progressive Rock, and it just runs through lots of different progressive rock albums from the late 60s up until around the early 80s. It's very much interesting, so if you're interested in maybe finding out about some new records that you haven't heard of, some new bands, I highly suggest checking out this book. It is very interesting. I have picked out a couple of albums that I'm going to listen to in the next couple of weeks, just through reading that book, because there's so much stuff I've not heard of, so many under the radar 70s progressive rock albums that I'm yet to discover. On with the review. Sorry for the very long intro. So, as I mentioned, Red is one of my favourite King Crimson albums and one of my favourite albums of all time. So, I've got it all written down here in my notebook of reviews. This is my 4th review, and I think we're going strong at the moment. So, I wrote so much about this particular record because I love it so much. The first question that I ask myself before I talk about the album: do I own it on vinyl? Because this is almost a sort of vinyl community channel. I have the box set. This is the wrong one. So I have these King Crimson box sets, which have all their albums from 1969 to 74, and so I have got a copy of Red in here. There we go. This is my copy. This is from the box set, and very lovely copy. This is the inner sleeve. If you want me to do a box set showcase on those King Crimson box sets, let me know. But when was this record released? This was released in 1974, so nearing the mid-70s, this record. I believe this was their last record before their 80s albums, so I think that they might have disbanded after this record and then got back together in the 80s for Discipline, a record I've not actually listened to yet. So this album has only got 5 tracks on it, and my god, those 5 tracks are spectacular. Such a great record this is. Just everything about it, and I will get into it now as to why I love it so much, all that stuff. So let's just dive in. So the title track of the album opens up the record. What an intro, may I add, just what an explosive intro to this album. I particularly love Bill Bruford's drumming in this particular track. I think it's very much noteworthy, and I think that his best drumming work has been in this album, just for King Crimson, not for anything else. This is an instrumental, and it's about 6 minutes long. It feels very heavy for a progressive rock record, because when I think prog, I do sometimes just think of the kind of whimsical, kind of Genesis-y kind of stuff, and then you hear this. This record is so dark, it's so heavy for a progressive rock album, and that's what makes me love it so much. Just the absolute mystery of this track and the album. The use of lower frequencies on this album as well, on this track rather, is absolutely brilliant, and It gives a very kind of scary vibe to the track, and I love that. I just love that so much about when something can make you feel scared. If it makes you feel scared, then the group are doing something right by being able to portray this emotion. I love Robert Fripp's guitar tone on this track and throughout the album, and the technique used as well. The way that this song was able to build up, and so it felt like a mountain. So you had the bit going up, the build up, you had the peak of the track, which is the middle, and then you had obviously the slope going back down, which is the end of the track. The way that it concluded was very, very good, and the way that the band were able to execute the slower tempo to the end of the track, absolutely brilliant. And the way that it leads into the next track is very kind of spooky, and I love that. Moving on to the second track of the album, Fallen Angel. Such an underrated gem from this album, may I add. I have the Road to Red box set, the CD one, and no live versions of this track. No live versions, and that makes me very sad, because this is one of my favourite tracks of all time, and one of my favourite tracks of King Crimson of all time. And just the intro, you already know it's going to be a good song. Just the use of the strings in the intro, the lyrics are just so beautifully written, so emotionally and thoughtfully written as well, may I add. I'm not sure who wrote the lyrics on this. I want to say Peter Seinfeld, but I don't think it was. I just had to look up, but it didn't say who wrote the lyrics for this particular track and the album. But going back onto it, I love the acoustic sections of this album. With the harmonics, absolutely amazing, absolutely beautiful. And what I really love, I think the most about this track, is the amount of emotion that's put in by John Wetton's vocal, by John Wetton himself. The vocal delivery is absolutely spectacular, absolutely brilliant, and it's so powerful, and the articulation and texture just left me thinking, oh my god, this is such a brilliant singer, as well as a brilliant musician. And the main riff going throughout the chorus, you know, the do 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 do. I absolutely love that, and the the use of the trumpet over it, and the guitar harmonies around I think 3.5 minute mark with the solo going on top of it. Absolutely, it made me so emotional. It makes me cry, I think, every single time I hear this track. The main bulk leads back into the verse section, so, and again, I'm going back to the mountain analogy. It's like going up, you have the build up, and then I think that then you have the middle bit, and then you have it going back into the verse again. And it felt so effortless, and I'm very jealous because it's very hard to execute that. I felt the emotion running throughout this song, and which is very much a theme throughout this album. I think this is quite an emotional album, as well as being a very dark album. You know, just the use of different instruments, the vocal delivery, all that stuff, and the lyrics as well, just makes for a very emotional record. And the track fades out, absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful record, absolutely underrated gem from this album, and it was probably the song that I liked the most off this album the first time I heard it. I think that Starless is probably now my favourite track, but that gets its own little clip. Absolutely spectacular track. On to the next track, One More Red Nightmare. So this is the middle of the album now. Another thing that stands out to me in this track is Bruford's drumming. Again, very much, as I said in the first track, very much noteworthy drumming in this album. Very, very, very good drumming in this record. Vocal delivery is great. I like the repetition of the riff and the up until around the 2-minute mark. And this section is just bass and guitar in this kind of middle section, and I think that works so freaking well. Absolutely love it as a bassist myself. I love being able to hear the bass guitar as well as the guitar. You know, I don't like, sometimes bands will overshadow the guitar, the bass, and that makes me quite sad because there are some very talented bass guitarists out there. But it sounds very badass in my opinion, and the use of the brass instruments and makes for a very much jazz influenced track. I heard a lot of jazz influence in this particular section of the track, and you know, obviously progressive rock is influenced by jazz. You know, it's almost like a you had jazz and then you had prog. You know, that's what it led into, the kind of fusion of jazz and classical music and contemporary rock music basically made progressive rock. And then all of that leads back into the vocal sections again, and this is very much a very typical progressive rock song structure, because you have the intro of the song, and then you have the verse, and the verse leading into the chorus, of course, and then you have the long period of time that's just instrumental, and it's usually very jazz-based instrumental. And then you lead back into the verse again, and then the ending of the song. So that is pretty much the structure of this particular track. And what I like about this record is that that's not the structure for every single track. You know, they mix it up a lot in this particular album of King Crimson, which is a very King Crimson thing to do. You know, you never know what's going to happen in the next track, which I found with listening to some of their other stuff after discovering Red and In the Court of the Crimson King. Listening to stuff like Lark's Tongues and Aspect, you just don't know what's going to happen next. And I love these sax solo towards the end, and it's got a very kind of jammy aspect to it. Like, I could see if they played this live, they'd extend it quite a lot, because that middle section can be jammed the hell out of and just have a lot of improvisation going on. And I love that. I'm just yet to listen to some of those live discs on that box set, because I love that track, One More Red Nightmare. It's absolutely fantastic, and hearing a live version maybe they'll be doing a lot of jamming. Unless you guys can tell me that, do they do a lot of jamming in that particular song, or just on this album in general? Because I know they don't actually play a lot of this album in some of the performances that I've seen, which is quite sad because it's one of their best albums. I think they play Starless quite a lot, and Red, but those 3 tracks sandwiched between those 2 phenomenal tracks, may I add, that is you got some very good material on that, and it just makes me kind of sad to see that them not playing some of that stuff. But I guess you can't fit everything into a set list, but I would love if they one day toured the whole Red album. Like, that would be fantastic. So next is the penultimate track on the album. This is Providence. Very, very interesting track. This is a very, very interesting track. It was never really my favourite when I first listened to it, because I just thought it was so weird and I didn't like it at first. But when I re-listened to it, I was like, this is a very important track on the album, and it works with the flow of the album. So this is another instrumental, and it's very, very experimental music, and there's always a sense of lingering, like, if you know what I mean. It's a very lingering song. It lingers, and you've got, you know, you feel like something's going to build up, and then something happens, like, suddenly, and then it goes back to, like, what's going to happen next. And I think that the introduction's actually quite beautiful. The violin introduction to the track is actually very nice. I like it quite a lot, and you can definitely feel the sense of something's going to happen. Lots of instruments used in this track, and lots of odd sounds, lots of interesting things happening. This is a great track for people who like the more classical side of the group. This is which I'm going on to now. This is clearly influenced by classical music. I mean, I was talking to my dad about this because I didn't know how to describe this piece of music. So I had to play it to him. I was like, so how would you describe this piece of music? And he said, well, this is very much neoclassical. And I thought, well, have you got any examples of maybe composers who have similar styles to this? And he mentioned one, and he played it. So this is, I don't know how to pronounce it. So this is the piece, and you can take a look at that. And he played that to me, and I thought, well, this is a ringer of that piece. Definitely inspired by a lot of these classical composers who are very much experimental composers of the early 20th century. And it definitely shows that prog is derived from classical music, not just jazz. It's definitely got a lot of classical roots, which, you know, a lot of these musicians who went on to be in prog bands were classically trained the majority of the time. You know, you had a lot of them went to music colleges and music schools and music institutes and all that kind of fancy stuff, and learnt their instrument classically. And I found that there was a lot of just bursts of silence throughout, which made it very interesting, and then sudden bursts of energy and music coming in and out, different sections, different ways, and different textures, different sounds, which made for a very interesting listening experience. And that definitely in the influence, you can hear their classical influence through this album, but not just on this album, but in records such as Lizard and Islands as well. And then around the kind of midpoint of the album is when it starts to become a bit more melodic, away from the experimental classical side into the more melodic side of the track. And the bass tone on this track is absolutely great. I loved it so much. That's one thing I really did pick up on. And the bass playing as well. It's absolutely fantastic. The tone especially, it's so heavy. Like, you can feel it weighing, like the weight of it. And I love that. And the ending obviously is very much proggy. And the build-up of this track was absolutely great. The build-up to that more progressive rock section. And the album closer, which I might be talking about for a long time, which is Starless. I absolutely love this track. 2 bits. I have heard it so many times, and every single time it gives me shivers. And it is genuinely one of the most beautiful pieces of music I've ever heard in my entire 19 years of being alive. And I've written down here that I could go on forever about how much I love this track, but because I don't want this video to be too long and to be more informative than my personal opinion, which a review is basically my opinion, but everything about this track is perfect. Everything from the string section intro to the solo that Robert Fripp is playing over that section is so carefully put together and so wonderfully executed. And the bass lines that's just flowing in the background of all of this is something that I've been learning recently, is absolutely fantastic. And the lyrics, of course, being very beautiful. It's such a delicate piece of music at this point. At this point of the song, because this has got different sections, this track. It's got 3 different sections. And this first section is so delicate and so carefully put together. And then at around the 4.5 minute point is when the darker aspects of the track start to come in, the bass line being very heavy, being very dark and mysterious and very sinister in a way, and the use of percussion at this point and the use of the violin as well to create some very strange sounds. And I think that this section is definitely carried by the bass guitar, just with Robert Fripp playing one note constantly. Obviously changing it every so often, but usually that's something I wouldn't be a fan of. But this, you can feel the tension, you can feel it building up. And that is what I love about this track, and it's such a great closing track to an album as well. Yeah, the way that you can feel it building up and building and building and building, and you know that the payoff is going to be great because it sounds great. And then when the drums come in from when the drums come into this section, then it's like, yeah, this is increasing, absolutely brilliant drum playing from Bill Bruford, and you get a sense of this is going to explode in a minute. And then I felt that the bass guitar got more aggressive as time went on throughout this song, and just got along with the drumming as well. This is the section that really exploded for me, when the bass got so much more heavy and the drums really kicked in. And my favourite part of the track, as much as I love it all, is around the 8.5-ish minute section with the build-up of, you know, the multi-tracked guitars panning left and right, just going on for a couple of seconds. You're like, oh, it's building, and then it all explodes into, you know, a lot of jazz-influenced, proggy, classical, everything in this particular track. And the ending is absolutely fantastic, the way that the group were able to take that that main riff, can you call it a riff or not? But the do 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 do, that bit, that they were able to adapt that into different instruments by the end of the track, and I love that. And the live version of this song that I've heard at the beginning, instead of Robert Fripp playing it on guitar, it's David Cross playing it on violin, which is absolutely beautiful, may I add. And the end of it just ends on such a high note, and just a fantastic record. This is such a fantastic record. This is a 10 out of 10 record for me. I love every single track on this album. There is no weak points on this album whatsoever. Everything is so carefully done, so carefully put together, so beautifully done, and I think it's their best record personally. Of course, I love, you know, Lux, Tungsten Aspect, In the Court of the Crimson King, In the Wake of Poseidon, everything that came before it I love, but this album takes it for me. This album is fantastic. If you've not listened to it yet, I really recommend that you do. If you're just getting into prog, I probably wouldn't recommend it straight away, but definitely check out this record when you're getting more into the genre itself. And my favourite tracks, I think that you were able to decipher from my ranting, Starless and Fallen Angel, both absolutely beautiful tracks that I wish would be played more often. And yeah, that is the end of this review. I had a fun time re-listening to this album because I hadn't heard it in a few months in full. I'd heard Red and I'd heard Starless and all the tracks separately, but I hadn't listened to it all in one album, and re-listening to it last night made me realise how much of a brilliant record this is and how incredible this record is. You know, I definitely think it's better than In the Court of the Crimson King, even though that is such an explosive debut album. I think that Red takes it for me, and again, if you've not listened to it, please do. I hope this review has convinced you to listen to it, because just from the intro, you're hooked. You know, you're taken in by the heaviness of this, and the darkness and the sinister aspect of the first track, right up until the melodic parts of Starless and the jammy parts of One More Red Nightmare and the complete classical chaos that is Providence. You've got something for everyone in there. You've got stuff for prog fans, you've got stuff for classical music fans, you've got stuff for jazz music fans, you've got stuff for rock music fans, even metal fans. You know, you've got something in there for everyone, and that's why I think it's such a brilliant record. That is the end of my review today. I hope you all enjoyed. I'm actually wearing a King Crimson shirt today. This is a cat food shirt. When I saw this, I had to buy it. It was very cute because I love cats, and it says I'm not even fit for a horse from the track Cat Food. So next week's review, if I'm not mistaken, I've written them all down, will be... we got a bit of 80s coming in next week. We've got Emerson, Lake and Powell, 1987, so you can have that to look forward to. I have not listened to that record in a few weeks, so that'll be interesting to revisit. No video tomorrow, as you know, but there will be a video on Friday, which will be my favourite record store day releases, going back to my vinyl community videos, because I've done quite a lot of proggy ones recently, and I am technically still a vinyl community channel as well as a prog rock channel, so yeah, that to look forward to, and yeah, see you guys later, bye.